Good morning, everybody, and welcome into the CitrusTV studios for today's edition of the No Pulp podcast. Will Hentschel joined by Mike Ostrowski and Jish Sokolsky. Guys, how we feeling? We're back in the studios. It should be a good episode.
Oh man, I'm super excited.
Yeah, great to be back.
We are talking college football today. We've just wrapped up week 6. Syracuse is 5-0 after a bye week last week, and it's been a back and forth season for a lot of teams. But guys, getting right into it, there are 15 undefeated teams remaining in FBS football. Which of those 15 teams do you think has the best chance to remain undefeated throughout the remainder of the season? You can include college football playoff or not. I maybe just stick with regular season right now, and then we can get into CFP later on.
So I got a serious one, and I got a little wild card one. I think the serious one is probably going to be Georgia, all things considered. Stetson Bennett is shaking those game manager allegations. That defense is as strong as ever, coached by Kirby Smart. You know, they still got Jalen Carter. They still got Keely Ringo, both playing out of their minds this year. I think it's going to be Georgia, but if we want to get a little fun, I think USC might have the best shot of staying undefeated. If they can defeat Utah tonight, their biggest challenge the rest of the way is UCLA, and they are quite literally a college football super team. Caleb Williams is the best college football quarterback right now. So I think that USC is another team to look out for.
Well, I'm thinking the same as far as Sirius goes. I'm saying Georgia's going to be they have the best shot of being an undefeated team. You look at their schedule, yes, they have to play Tennessee, but it's at home. They have some ranked matchups on the road against Mississippi State and Kentucky, but this is still one of, if not the best defense in the nation, and defense wins championships. So what I think is going to happen this year, if you want a not so serious pick, I'm going to go with Coastal Carolina. Yeah, take a look at their schedule. There's not exactly many heavy hitters. I mean, Appalachian State, even at 3-3, might be that upset, but there's no one on there that you say, like, yeah, this is a team that's absolutely going to give them a challenge. So if you want that, underdog or that surprise story this year, I think it's going to be the Chanticleers.
They do wrap up their season, though, with a road game at Virginia and then a road game at number 25 James Madison. So that's no easy feat to get 2 W's right there, though, for the Chanticleers. Still a good program for sure, and definitely an underdog or kind of a dark horse candidate if you want to go in that direction. It's tough because there are a lot of great teams out there, and obviously some of these teams got to play each other, but the way that Georgia has been playing this season, if we're going to go with a totally serious pick and just try to go with what's the best candidate to go undefeated here, I don't think there's a lot of teams beating Georgia. And they take on Vanderbilt this upcoming weekend, so that should be a lock-in for a win. But Georgia, they're carrying all the momentum they had from last season. They're just as effective, just as deadly, offense and defense, one of the best in both categories in the nation. But they're too good, simply at the end of the day. I don't think a lot of other teams can compete with them. I think, though, honestly, if we're talking regular season, I think this TCU team has really been turning a lot of heads. And they take on a very tough challenge this week against number 8 Oklahoma State. So it's not a tough battle, but I really like the way the Horned Frogs have been playing. They've done a lot well on offense and defense. And I think they've just got the whole package set up for maybe not a college football playoff run. Maybe there's a loss in the Big 12 championship or something like that kind of keeps them out of that. But for the remainder of the regular season, especially the way how weak kind of perennial Big 12 teams that you would expect to be good, Oklahoma has not been good this season. Texas has been all right this season. And Texas looks a lot better because they just played Oklahoma. But neither of those teams have really been impressing me too much. But I think TCU might kind of rise above the rest and become the best team out of that Big 12 conference. But that's just my take on it. Mike, you mentioned that Tennessee team a little bit earlier. That's a really important game kind of on the horizon. Ranked number 6 right now, and they just got College Game Day for the second time in very quick succession. Are you guys buying or selling on the Volunteers? Is it right for college football game day to kind of be doubling up like this? And is this Tennessee team kind of finally the one that can send some parity in the SEC?
I'm going to say that on regards to College Game Day, no, it's not a problem that they got it. This is still one of the best matchups this weekend. They're hosting the number 3 team in the nation in Alabama. It's one of the biggest rivalries that is hopefully going to be a rivalry game this year. But as far as them being serious, Do I think they can maybe finish 10-2? Absolutely. But do I think they can really challenge some of the other SEC teams for a title? No, they're not quite there yet. They still have a very explosive offense, but not one that can quite crack some of the top defenses.
Now, the question here is, are we buying or are we selling Tennessee at this present moment? I think that this is the peak of Tennessee. This is the perfect time to sell them, because I do believe that if any team can knock off Alabama, I think it can be them tomorrow. I mean, you mentioned it. Tennessee has that electric offense. Hendon Hooker has been money for them this entire season. He's going to be a star in the collegiate and NFL level to boot. And Alabama's looked kind of shaky these past few games. I mean, against Texas A&M, they almost dropped that. They almost lost to Texas even without Quinn Ewers at quarterback. So I think that Tennessee might push themselves into the top 4 and have everybody losing their minds if they can beat Alabama tomorrow, which I believe is a winnable game for them. As for the College Game Day debacle, I mean, you want a little bit, you don't want it there twice in that short of a time period, do you? I think that there are plenty of marquee matchups they could have gone to. There's Penn State, Michigan this week. There's, not to be too biased, but there's Syracuse, NC State. I think, Marshall Street might be a really good place to have College Game Day, but I digress. I think that Tennessee is going to have a really, really solid week of media coverage, and then when they play Georgia, everyone will realize, yeah, this is going to be like maybe a 10-2 team, but a very, very solid season for them so far.
They're just saving us for Notre Dame week, don't worry.
Oh, yeah? You think so?
Yeah.
The 3-2 Notre Dame?
We'll get into that later.
We'll talk about Notre Dame in a little bit. So we can pump the brakes on that for now, but I would love to see a College Game Day coming to the Dome, at least before I graduate. Please, somebody. This is the only season we really had. Although we did have that opportunity. You guys weren't here, but my freshman year, we had Clemson coming in here week 3. We beat Liberty week 1, and then we got smacked by Maryland, so they weren't going to have a 2-0 Clemson team against a 1-1 Syracuse team. That's just kind of how the cookie crumbles sometimes. But this is a tough situation, because I think Tennessee is kind of at that flux point of, do you want to buy them or do you want to sell them? Because they've looked nothing but electric all season. I mean, they handled a now ranked LSU team 40-13 on October 8th. And just before that, they beat a Florida team in Knoxville, I should say, 38-33. So they've gotten into these tough environments. They beat Pittsburgh on the road. They beat LSU on the road. Now they take on Alabama at home. Is Alabama a great team? Absolutely. Is Tennessee a great team? That's kind of what's up for debate right now. And I think that at home with College Game Day, when the stakes are this high, this is kind of when the best teams start to reveal themselves. I think the Volunteers, in history certainly, are not as dominant as the Crimson Tide, and that could express itself today. But if they get past Alabama, they have Tennessee Martin, which should be a lock. They have Kentucky. Well, granted, Kentucky is ranked right now. That should be a lock. And then you go to Athens, and then Tennessee has to play Georgia. I just said about 2 seconds ago that I think Georgia is going to go undefeated, so I'm going to maintain that point that Georgia is going to remain undefeated and beat Tennessee that game. But, I mean, if Tennessee beats Alabama today and goes into that Georgia game still undefeated, I think that this is a squad that could go to the SEC championship game. I think that, granted, they'll probably have to beat Georgia at least once to do it. This is a team that I think you could see in the college football playoff. Granted, a lot of things got to go right. I'm not saying this is, absolutely pen the Volunteers in for college football playoff time, but a lot of things got to go right. They certainly have the capability to do it, and they're playing like champions. So as of right now, I'm going to buy Tennessee. And quickly bouncing onto the College Game Day subject, is it probably the best matchup in the country? Sure, but it's not the only ranked matchup in the country. I was eyeballing that Penn State-Michigan game. That's going to be phenomenal at the Big House. Big 10 noon kickoff. I'm getting my conferences crossed up. Again, Syracuse, NC State, there's a case to be made for that. And then you've got Mississippi State and Kentucky, and then number 7 USC at number 20 Utah. So there's a lot of options, but when you get SEC football at 3:30 in Knoxville, Tennessee, that's going to be hard to beat, so I can understand why ESPN would want to do that. We've talked about the SEC. We've talked about some undefeated squads. Let's talk about a team that's not doing so well this season. Notre Dame has won 3 in a row. including taking down number 18 BYU not so long ago. And they are getting some votes, just shy of 60 at this point. Are the Fighting Irish a good football team? And kind of were the first 2 games a fluke? And is Drew Pine legit? Is the question here.
Oh, man. I mean, no. No. They lost to Marshall week 2. We're not going to forget that so easily. I mean, who did they beat in that 3-game stretch? They beat California Berkeley. Okay, that is what it is. They won by 7 points. They dropped a lot of points on a really, really bad UNC defense. I'm not entirely moved by that. I think their one true impressive win that might be indicative of what this team can become was over BYU, but I honestly am not seeing a lot to be impressed with. I think Notre Dame really is going through a transitional year almost with the loss of Brian Kelly this offseason. They're kind of trying to re-identify themselves. I think Michael Mayer, their tight end, has been phenomenal all year. I think that he's been putting this team on his back. And I think that when you have a tight end like Michael Mayer, a quarterback like Drew Pine can look good. I think he is an upgrade over what they started the season with, but I don't necessarily think he is the guy moving forward. He is, to me, just another Ian Book, another Jack Cohn, just a kind of like a stopgap. Nothing to really move the needle for Notre Dame, in my opinion.
And I'd agree with a lot of what you said. You know, Notre Dame really just kind of stuck in that transitional period. Brian Kelly pretty much took off in the middle of the night for LSU, and that just left them in a really bad situation where you're kind of just you have an assistant just thrown in the head coaching role with no real prior experience in that regard, trying to lead one of the biggest brands in the country, because like Notre Dame can still be a good football team this year, but not a great one. They're getting this attention because they are the brand. They are the last big independent football team in the country. And when you look at the team, like you said, when you look at the games they've won, they barely beat Cal. That is not the sign of a real contender. But as long as they keep winning, their next couple games are Stanford and UNLV. They should win both of those games.
Right.
If they don't, then there's going to be a really serious conversation about, is Mr. Freeman the future coach at Notre Dame, or is this really showing he doesn't have job security at the moment? Building off that, is Pine really the sole reason for the offensive success? Not really. You mentioned one of the best tight ends in the country. I think that is more why Notre Dame has really turned things around on that side of the ball. You know, that being said, he's an upgrade from what they had, and I think he's going to be a reason why the offense continues to improve as we go through the rest of the season. But on that note, they're an 8-4 team.
Ooh.
That's still bowl eligibility. That's more than a lot of other teams can say. We all know Notre Dame. Notre Dame, like you mentioned, is kind of that brand. It does have that aura about it. I think they got their season off on an unfair rap. I think everyone saw that loss to Ohio State and was like, well, Notre Dame's not legit. There's maybe 2 teams in the country that on any given day, on their best day, can beat Ohio State right now, and I think Notre Dame got a little disrespected by that. Granted, they did go and lose to the Marshall Thundering Herd the next week at home, which is just a terrible look, but credit to the Thundering Herd. I tip my cap to you. I think Notre Dame has just kind of been unfairly placed with these very high expectations. Did people expect them to make a bowl game this year? Yes, and I think they will do that. Did people maybe expect them to make the college football playoffs this season? Maybe a lot fewer, and I think even that was a little unwarranted. If you look at their schedule and if you look at kind of the recruits that they had in and their expectations in the preseason, I don't think they were nearly that high. But a bad loss to Marshall is kind of, to me, the only blemish that they've had on this season, and it's not a good blemish. Let's be very realistic here. They should have beat Marshall, but you mentioned they take on Stanford, they take on UNLV. Those should be 2 wins right there. Then they play Syracuse, and that's kind of the big question mark, because the Orange have been very good this season, but Notre Dame, I think, has the capability. They have the depth. They have that history. I think on any given day, they can beat kind of a mid-ranked opponent, and I think that's exactly the boat that Syracuse is in. It's not like the Orange have the best track record against the Fighting Irish to go off of. Right after they play Syracuse, Notre Dame goes to Clemson. That'll be a loss. Then, in their final 3 games, it's Navy, Boston College, number 7 USC. I think in their final 3 games, they're going to go 2-3. And there should be a loss to Clemson and a loss to USC. But I think the Stanford game, the UNLV game, those are locks for Notre Dame. And then the Syracuse game, we're going to just have to play that by ear. Is Notre Dame going to just do something absolutely profound and prove to everybody that they belong to be ranked and kind of continue that march towards bowl eligibility, or are they going to kind of take a few hits and limp away from that one? Is their quarterback play to blame? I don't really know. It's tough to just blame a team's woes, even if you can call them woes. A loss to Ohio State's a tough thing to really pin on one guy. But, it got mentioned when you guys were talking, the coach leaving and just storming off to LSU in the middle of the night. Brian Kelly didn't do them any favors. Now they got a new coach in there in his first season. Maybe he was a little rushed in his preparation, and that kind of didn't bode well for the team. But it's a tough boat for Notre Dame to be in. I can understand why those Notre Dame fans are frustrated. But I also can see why non-Notre Dame fans might not be so sold on why this team thinks they're legit. But I think Notre Dame will get to bowl eligibility. I think they've earned that. I think a loss to Ohio State at the beginning of the season isn't enough to really write it off. And I think they've at least started to make up for that loss against Marshall. So we've gone from ACC to ranked opponents to Notre Dame. I think we got to take a little shift now to one of my favorite places, the Big Ten. The Fighting Tommy DeVitos over in Illinois are back in the top 25 at the number 24 spot, and they actually lead the Big Ten West. Tommy DeVito's had a very productive season over in Champlain. Can Illinois actually win the lesser of the two Big Ten divisions? And who are the other teams that are kind of fighting for that Big Ten crowd? Mike, we'll start with you.
I think they can. They still have one of the best defenses in the country. Obviously, they still got to play Michigan, I believe. Yeah, at Michigan. At the second to last game of the year, so you pretty much have to pencil that in as a loss. But other than that, I think every other game on the Illinois schedule is winnable. I think at 10-2, that could be enough to keep them at the top of that part of the conference. And going off, they also have the Golden Gophers this week. That could be a bit of a challenge. But after them, there's Purdue, who we've seen lost a couple close games that, honestly, if it wasn't for coaching mistakes, they probably could have won. They probably could have beat Penn State. They had a chance to close out us in week 3 if it weren't for that last-minute touchdown to Aronde Gadsden. So I think they're a very close number 2. They still have an explosive offense that might be the only thing that's stopping Illinois from being outright winners.
Yeah, I think that obviously Illinois has a chance in a conference like the Big Ten West. It's really the best defense that's going to win you these games. I mean, Iowa has typically dominated the Big Ten West, obviously not as much this year. I think the biggest threat to them is the team that was formerly in the lead until this past week. Minnesota has been leaning on that ground game. It led them to a 4-0 record, and I think that they can continue with that. It's really like traditional hard-nosed football they play out there in the Big Ten West. And I think that their running back, Mohamed Ibrahim, Mohamed Ibrahim, he is one of the best in the country. And I think that when these two teams do meet up, it could go either way. I think the winner of that game will ultimately win the Big Ten West. But as you said, the Illinois defense has been stone cold all season long. They've been a really well-coached squad. Tommy DeVito is looking competent. Their running back also leads the entire Big Ten in rushing yards per game. Chase Brown is 146 yards per game. So, I mean, they're very, very similar teams, and I think when they play each other, we will really see the champion of the Big Ten West.
I'm going to have to agree with that. I think this Illinois defense is really too good to pass up. They held Wyoming to 6 points, Virginia to 3. They shut out Chattanooga. They beat Wisconsin 34-10, and then they held Iowa in a real Big Ten classic, 9-6 over Iowa. So that was some. You want to talk about hard-nosed football? Let's talk about 9-6. Is Tommy DeVito's having a great season? He transferred, he hit the market, and now he's just succeeding with them. So it's great to see that he's still maintaining a strong college career. But if there is to be success found in the Big Ten West, I think we've all agreed that it's going to come from that defense. And they've got a tough test this week against Minnesota. We also said that, the Big Ten West, compared to the Big Ten East, is, not as strong. You got in the East, you got Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, even Rutgers and Michigan State year in and year out, although they're having down years, can be very competitive. I think if you look at this Big Ten West, Illinois, Purdue, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern and Iowa. You mentioned, Jish, that Iowa's usually the one taking the cake. They haven't had it this season. Nebraska's been iffy. Minnesota's had a few stumbles here and there. But I think this Illinois defense is just so good that even if the offense doesn't show up, even if maybe Tommy DeVito doesn't have his best day going, they can carry them to this win. So I do see them winning this week against Minnesota. I do see them getting a W against Nebraska. The Michigan State, the Purdue's, the Michigan, and the Northwesterns, I'm not so sold on. They'll really have to kind of surprise me this season. Maybe the offense goes into another level and prove something to me there. But I think at least their next two matchups are definite wins. And that should be sending them to at least a bowl eligibility. They're one win away from achieving that. And I think that, as it stands right now, I don't see many teams in the Big Ten West that are going to compete with them at the defensive level. So if the other teams in the Big Ten West can't compete against them, I think it will be Illinois kind of pulling away with that crown. And hey, that should be great for Tommy DeVito because he struggled here at Syracuse. The passing game wasn't really the way he wanted it to be. Maybe it was offensive coordination or maybe it was the defense that was behind him, but now he's got a fighting shot over at Illinois, and it looks like he's making the most of it. So we've gone from the Big Ten now to non-Power 5 conferences. They've been iffy so far, guys. I'm not going to lie. But only two teams in the top 25 do not come from the Power 5. That's James Madison, and I'm blanking on the other one, and I'm scanning the list right now. It is James Madison and Cincinnati. Thank you very much. Two teams in the top 25 do not come from the Power 5. Is this the weakest that kind of the group of five field has been in the last 10 years? Because it seemed like last year the group of five could really do no wrong. You had Cincinnati making the college football playoffs. You had them actually competing in the college football playoffs fairly well. And it was kind of the group of five was sort of riding this high from Cincinnati. So is this kind of a step back from that? And is this kind of the weakest that it's been so far?
I mean, I think that every year it's probably going to get a little bit weaker. It seems that these teams that overperform in the group of five, they make the jump to the next level. I think Cincinnati's becoming a Big 12 team. BYU became a Big 12 team. UCF was in the group of five as well. I think the next teams to make the jump are probably going to be Coastal Carolina. I think they're probably up there. But, I mean, shout out to James Madison, man. A team that just jumped up from the FCS level to the FBS level, and they are balling out in the Sun Belt. Undefeated, ranked. You do not see that every day of the week. So, I mean, I'm going to shed a little. I know this is, they haven't been as good as in prior years. We aren't seeing that surprise miracle run from a group of five team, but I think that James Madison has been quite the heartwarming story this year, and I'm excited to see what they can continue to do throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, and so am I, honestly. But the one team I'm going to put just a little bit higher is the same team that had such a great year last year and made the college football playoff, that being Cincinnati. They got to play UCF. I think that's going to be a tough game going down to Florida. But other than that, they have a schedule that I think they can really take care of business, especially with their home matchups coming up. They still have they're very explosive on both sides of the ball, and they have the best shot at getting one of those marquee bowl games. Do I think they are really still in contention for the college football playoff? Maybe not. It's very top heavy this year between Big Ten and SEC teams, but they can make the New Year's Six.
And which Power 5 team do you think, Jish, has that opportunity to do that? Because Mike said it's Cincinnati. You're kind of sold on James Madison. Do you think they have the opportunity to get up to that group of, or that, the New Year's Six bowl kind of level?
I think that James Madison, they are in a weaker conference. I know the same argument was made for Cincinnati last year, but I think that Cincinnati, I would agree with Mike. Cincinnati, of those two teams, I think has a greater shot of moving into that area. I just think that they're a more talented team, even though they did lose all that talent last year. But, I mean, again, I just like JMU. What can I say? I'm a sucker for the underdog, man. That's what I got to say about that.
I think James Madison, I was also going to say James Madison has that best spot because they've kind of just wiped through all their opponents. They played Georgia Southern, Marshall, Old Dominion, Georgia State, and Coastal for the remainder of their season. But they also have to play Louisville as an ACC competition coming in on November 5th. Is that going to be a win? I'm not going to say that Louisville is going to lose to James Madison, but
we know about Louisville.
JMU is a good team, and I think they could do it. And they've certainly had a presence about them since they've moved from the FCS level to the FES level. They got a heck load of confidence, that's for sure, being a number 25 team in the nation their first year at trying it. So, hey, James Madison, I think I like them a little bit more than Cincinnati right now. Cincinnati does have a loss on the season. It's going to be very difficult for them in that group of 5 position to start climbing up the ranks and getting into that New Year's 6 position. But James Madison, not a blemish on their season. I really like how the Dukes are playing this season. I think they have that opportunity to maybe start climbing that ladder, maybe incrementally at first. But again, they're only 1 win away from getting to a bowl game, period. Whether or not it's going to be a New Year's 6, I'm not sure. But certainly what James Madison has done this season is a really good sign for not just group of 5 teams, but also FCS teams that are considering making that jump to bowl eligibility. There was a lot of chatter in the past couple of years. North Dakota State, who's kind of one of the perennial stalwarts at FCS football, how would they compete against other FBS teams? And they occasionally play a Power 5 or even a Group of 5 team, but I think if any team is really kind of eyeballing this James Madison season, it is North Dakota State. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that, but that's how I feel.
I feel like it should have been North Dakota State for quite some time now. They've been dominant in that FCS for how many years? They have 2 NFL starting quarterbacks in the league right now. Like they should be making the jump sooner rather than later.
Yeah, they should, but at the same time, if they know they're winning a championship in the FCS every year, why ruin a good thing?
Would you rather an FCS championship or like a mediocre FBS season?
I mean, I think the answer is pretty obvious there. You take the championship every time.
It's true. Just for the folks at home checking in on North Dakota State football like I am, they are 5-1. They've only dropped 1 game to Arizona back on September 17th. And even that, it was only a 3-point game, 31-28 in Arizona. So not only are they kind of dominating the FCS, but they're also competing against the FBS. So, and the Pac-12 nonetheless. So certainly a good spot to be in if they're North Dakota State. We've got the AP and coaches poll kind of differing on a lot of these teams. We're going to go from kind of who's the best group of 5 team to who's kind of some of the best ranked teams and kind of the disparity in that. The AP poll and the coaches poll have not agreed with each other, especially in the top 3. The AP has from 1 to 3 Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. So the Bulldogs, the Buckeyes, and the Crimson Tide, 1, 2, 3 in the AP poll. The coaches poll, on the other hand, has from 1, 2, 3 Alabama, Georgia, and then Ohio State. So from SEC, Big Ten. What do you guys think is the actual correct ranking, and kind of why? What's your reasoning behind it, and why do you think it should be 1, 2, 3, either Alabama, Ohio State, or Georgia?
I think the AP's got it right with Georgia being number 1, Ohio State at 2, and the Crimson Tide down at 3. We've seen Alabama have some pretty close calls this year. Like the games you do not expect out of Alabama. They should not have been that close against Texas without their starting quarterback. Even last time out against Texas A&M. Sorry for bringing up Johnny Football, but he's right. If there was a good play call on that final drive, the Aggies could have shocked the world there. But I think they're undefeated, but having them down at the number 3 spot is right. Maybe they can, if they can really come out and showcase all their potential against Tennessee this week, maybe they earn that moving up the rankings a bit. But Georgia's the right call at number 1. That defense is just as good as it was with the national championship winning team last year, and I don't see any reason why it's going to get worse. Ohio State at 2 makes sense because they haven't played their biggest rivals yet. They haven't played Michigan, they're at Penn State in 3 weeks. So if they can take down the Nittany Lions at their own home turf, then yeah, maybe they earn the case for the number 1 spot.
I'm going to have to agree with you. What do the coaches know about football? I mean, granted, the coaches poll, they've been very kind to Syracuse over the weeks. They were the first ones to rank us. But I think that they've definitely got this right over the AP poll definitely has this right over the coaches poll this week at least. Georgia definitely is the number 1 team in the nation so far. They had that one little scare against Missouri, lest we forget. If they do have another one, I think that Ohio State should be the number one team in this country. They've looked really, really solid. It's never looked like they've ever been in doubt in most of these games. I mean, obviously, week 1 against Notre Dame, only a 21-10 victory, and still a 2-score game. Ohio State, even with injuries to Jackson Smith and Jigba throughout the year, they have a next man up mentality. This wide receiver core is deep. This quarterback is probably going to be the first overall pick in the draft, the way things are trending. This entire team is super complete. The defense does its job. The offense does its job. Brian Hartline is going to be a future offensive coordinator at the collegiate and maybe even NFL level. I think that Ohio State being above Alabama is not outrageous, and I think the AP has this right.
I think you look at it year in and year out, and Alabama is almost always at the top or near the top. And certainly, no matter what poll you have, either the coaches or the AP, they're up there and they're in college football playoff territory. But I am going to have to agree with the AP poll because I think Georgia has looked at times this season just to be a professional team. They've been so good defensively. Their offense has rarely faltered. They had that one tiny scare against Missouri, but they backed it up with a huge win against Auburn. So even when they stumble a little bit, it doesn't take them very long to get back on track and regain their footing and get back up to speed, the Georgia team that we all know about. And that's kind of interesting because last season Georgia was, certainly they made the college football playoffs and they were competitive, but they were kind of like, oh, is Georgia, how are they going to fare against Alabama if they got to play them again? But they got the job done the second time around and got that national championship title. Ohio State, I'm not so sold on right now. Granted, this will change when they start playing their Big Ten opponents, but they do have a much tougher schedule coming up than what they previously had. They got big wins against Rutgers and Michigan State. Now they take on Iowa. They're bye this week. They take on Iowa next week. They take on Penn State, like you said, in 3 weeks, and then they close out their season, obviously with one of the most historical matchups in college football history, Michigan at the Horseshoe, November 26th. So certainly a calendar circle on that one. Ohio State, yes, they played absolutely phenomenal football, but against who? They beat a Notre Dame that I said was a Notre Dame team that I said earlier wasn't getting enough credit. It was still a solid win against Notre Dame, 21-10. Then they blew out Arkansas State, just blew them out of the water. Then they demolished Toledo, and then they really took down Wisconsin that hasn't been putting up much of a fight this season. So that's 4 kind of easy-ish wins comparatively when you want to look at the college football schedule. I think the real meat and potatoes of Ohio State's schedule starts right now, or I should say next week. They're off this week, but it starts next week against Iowa, and then they got to take on Penn State on the road. If Penn State gets a W this week against Michigan, circle your calendars. I think college football game day will be at, is it College Station? It's State College, Pennsylvania. Thank you very much. I do have friends that go to Penn State who are going to be kicking me for that one. But Ohio State at Penn State, I could very much imagine that being a ESPN college football game day kind of scenario. But again, Georgia's really good. Alabama's really good. Ohio State's really good. But I am going to have to go with the AP ranking of Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, and Alabama 3. And guys, we have Clemson at number 4, so there is some representation for the ACC in that AP poll. There should be some college football playoff presence, but we did get some news earlier this season that the college football playoff would be expanding to 12 teams. So for the first 4 teams, that would give them a bye week, and then teams 5 through 12 would make the college football playoff. So I want to ask you guys, hypothetically speaking, if the college football playoff were to start now with these teams, with the 12-team format, what are some matchups that you like? What are some teams that you like? And do you think that this is really a formula that could work in the future for the college football playoff?
So it's expanding to 12 teams, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So it would start off with the 5 through 12.
Because teams 1, 2, 3, and 4, we get a first round bye.
Right. So 5 would play the 12. I'm still figuring this out, right? I feel like I'm an older soul right now. Let's see, because I thought it was the first 5 teams, because that would have created a USC-UCLA matchup. That would have been
great.
Chef's kiss right there. But I really like the, at first glance, I mean, just the Michigan-Oregon game would be a really, really phenomenal one. I think that ever since Oregon got embarrassed week 1, they've really put it together. Bo Nix has, played to his strengths, let's just say. I think that would be a very, very interesting matchup between Pac-12 and Big Ten. You look at some of these other ones. You got Tennessee versus UCLA, if it stands right now. Excellent matchup. USC versus Penn State, I think that would probably be the one to look out for. I don't want to talk too much, but I mean, you know how I feel about USC. I've said it earlier in this podcast. And Penn State has looked quite phenomenal themselves this season, also undefeated. It would be a clash of the Titans between two storied history programs.
Yeah, I'm definitely going with Penn State, USC out of that bunch. They've got a lot of history, most recently in the Rose Bowl, playing a very back-and-forth game. USC coming out on top 52-49. One of the most exciting games I've ever watched as a college football fan. I think we would see a repeat, not necessarily a USC win, but a repeat of that kind of game. A very heated, very over-the-top, like offensive gun show. Some of these other matchups, like you said, Michigan, Oregon could be interesting, but I feel a lot of these we're going to run into the problem with the higher seeds just being, even in like the 5, 6, 7s, just being in a class of their own against some of the guys sneaking in the 10, 11, 12 spots. UCLA is the one exception that I think has really surprised me this year. Can they keep that up as they really get into the meat and potatoes of their schedule? That's to be determined. But if it were to start right now, could they hang with Tennessee? I don't think so.
I think this is also, you got to look at the fact that teams 5, 6, 7, and 8 will all get home games for these opening rounds of the college football playoff. So that's a playoff game at Michigan Stadium. That's a playoff game at Tennessee. It's a playoff game at the LA Memorial Coliseum. And it's a playoff game at Oklahoma State, which are some of the 4 best atmospheres that you could even imagine for a college football game, let alone a college football playoff game. I think if you look down this list, though, Michigan, Oregon, that's turning a lot of heads. You guys mentioned the USC Penn State game. That should be very exciting. Oklahoma State and Ole Miss, too, could really turn some heads. But I'm kind of, this is, again, hypothetical. The college football playoff will not expand until about 2024. So that's either next year or the year after is what they're really trying to push for. But Tennessee, UCLA at Tennessee, I think, would be one of the most interesting matchups. We just talked about how Tennessee is maybe kind of slept on in this SEC. Maybe they're not going to be given the shot that they may deserve this season, even if they lose a game, even if they lose the SEC championship game. Maybe they won't get a seat at the table for the college football playoff. I think with this new format, teams like that will dominate. Fringe teams that are kind of just on the bubble, the 5, the 6, the 7, I think those are when these teams really start to kind of come out of the shadows and show the rest of the country what they've been able to do, but just really haven't had the platform to do. That, I think, is exactly why Tennessee will benefit from an expansion like this. They take on a team like UCLA at home. That stadium seats 90, 95,000 people. That place is going to be filled to the gills against a Pac-12 team like UCLA. And I think it's very exciting and a very good opportunity for these teams to showcase the great football that they've been playing all season. I mean, Tennessee, let's not mince words. They're, I think, a college football playoff contender. They just need things to go right this season. And then they take on UCLA at home in the college football playoff. If it does expand to 12 teams and if Tennessee is in the scenario in a few years from now, could be extremely exciting and just a great opportunity for the college football playoff landscape to kind of show what it's about.
See,
you got something?
I like that. I like how you say that it'll benefit Tennessee, because in a scenario like this, if Tennessee's the 6th seed, they probably lost or were runners-up in the SEC tournament. So if they get a shot to recalibrate against a 12-seeded team and then get another shot at a team that maybe just beat them in the championship, I mean, we saw it with Georgia, Alabama in the national title game last year. Mm-hmm. Alabama had just beaten Georgia in the SEC championship. Georgia came in and showed them what Georgia football is really about. They've seen them a bunch of times now. It creates more interesting matchups, a little bit more parity as well. So I really do like the point that the random SEC team, I shouldn't say random, but the SEC team that appears for a year and dominates, like your LSUs, your what seemed to be Georgia's last year, they will have their chance to shine over a team like Alabama who just does it consistently year after year.
Right.
Yeah. And having that extra home game for those 5 through 8 teams, that just has to put them in such a confident position, going in front of your fans one more time, some cases 90 to close to 100,000 maniacs getting you ready and feel like, yeah, you can take, if you win that game, you can take on the world. All of a sudden, you're not afraid to take on those 1 through 4 teams.
All right, guys, rapid fire. Next week, UCLA, we just talked about the Bruins, has beaten 2 ranked teams in a row and are just outside the top 10. Right now, they sit at that number 12 spot, or excuse me, that number 11 spot. Oregon's at the 12. So they sit right at the number 11 spot. The Bruins have the 12th ranked Oregon Ducks after this upcoming bye week. Can the Bruins make it 3 ranked wins in a row?
You want me to start off?
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe they can. Now, is it this a bit more of a toss-up than before? I'd say yes. But can they do it? Absolutely. Why not? I know I'm being very vague here as I try to get this to load, but come on. But come on, like Oregon is not, now size isn't everything, but Oregon is not exactly the fiercest college football environment. It's good, do not get me wrong, but this is not the situation of, UCLA trying to go into the big house or the horseshoe and have 100,000 people screaming at the top of their lungs. This is a team where the crowd itself isn't going to be as much of a factor. So I think as long as they can tune out the noise that is there and just stay focused, just keep doing what they've been doing all season long, relying on both the run and the pass. They've been successful with both. Then, as long as they keep that mix up on offense, then yeah, I don't see why the Bruins can't make it 3 in a row.
And I think I would have to agree with you on that one as well. I mean, Oregon, you look at their schedule, they haven't necessarily been tested against these elite teams, and when they did, they got smacked in the mouth, 49-3 against Georgia. They beat the one good team they beat, and we're noticing a pattern. Notre Dame also beat this team. BYU was the one good team they beat. They beat Stanford. They beat Arizona, who almost lost to North Dakota State. They beat Washington State by 3. Oregon has taken advantage of some inferior defenses in this Pac-12, and I think that UCLA has been a more sturdy team, a more solid and consistent team. They've relied on their running back, Zach Charbonnet, and I think that they're going to get it done, make it 3 weeks in a row where they beat ranked teams, and I think that will propel UCLA into the top 10, maybe right next to their crosstown rivals in USC.
So you think Oregon discrediting that number 12 BYU win? Because that was a very big win for the Ducks. I mean, 41-20 over a solid Cougar side.
I mean, I don't want to completely discredit it. That's why I said it was their one really good win. This is also a BYU squad who has now dropped one to Notre Dame as well. I think that they've kind of stumbled a little bit after coming out of the gate hot. Not to say BYU is a bad team by any means, but I do think that being your signature win of the year is not necessarily going to spell success against a team like UCLA that's been dominating this year.
It's going to be an exciting matchup for sure because Bo Nix has combined for 20 touchdowns this season, has thrown for over 1,500 yards, has a completion percentage of over 70%, and then you flip that to the other side, the UCLA side. Dorian Thompson-Robinson has also thrown for 1,500 yards, has also ran in 4 touchdowns himself for a total of 19. So these are 2 very evenly matched quarterbacks going up against each other at the highest level with a lot on the line. UCLA, they're making a push for that college football playoff. They are just outside the top 10. They are 6-0 right now. Oregon is not a bad team by any stretch. They're right behind him at the number 12 spot. Their only loss is to the number 1 team in the country, who I think can beat just about anybody on any given day. So you got to credit the Ducks for that matchup. I would have to take, though, in this matchup, the way I'm seeing it kind of shake out, I'm more inclined to take UCLA in this one, just because I think they've got the advantage with the quarterback play. I think their running game is a bit more balanced, and I also just... It's a tough matchup, and I think it's a coin flip, and I think either team is very solid and has the ability to win. But I just think in this game right now, what UCLA has done all season with their quarterbacks, with their running, with their balanced offense, I think they throw the ball a lot. I think they're smart with their run game. I think they make the right decisions when they need to. So I'm going to take the Bruins in this one. I think they will make it to 3 ranked wins in a row, though. But I don't think that should automatically kind of discredit Oregon. That would drop them to 5-2. Sure, they'll move down the rankings, maybe go into one of the 20 spots, but I think they're still a very solid team, have a lot to show for this season, and can certainly turn some heads come bowl time if they get that extra win that they require. But I think UCLA has just brought everything to the table. They've had such a solid season all around, and Oregon, I think, might just get bit by the bear a little bit this weekend.
Shout out Chip Kelly.
Shout out Chip Kelly. He's done something right with that UCLA team. Mike, Jish, closing thoughts, anything you guys want to say, touch up upon on this exciting college football season very rapidly?
Let's go Orange.
Let's go Orange. A lot of surprises, a lot of not surprises. Same teams at the top. Parity isn't real.
Parity is not real, according to Jish Sokolsky. So, For Mike Ostrowski, for Jish Sokolsky, I'm Will Hentschel. Thank you so much for tuning into the No Pulp podcast. Syracuse takes on NC State this weekend in a very exciting game at the Carrier Dome, expecting almost 50,000 seats in there. CitrusTV will have all the coverage for you just after that game. We'll see you on the other side for another edition of the No Pulp podcast.